And the idea really is for you to get a sense of, one, about international development, which is good. And the second, I think, is also to think about how education works in the UK. So to some extent, of course, this class will be easier, slower, but it'll give you an idea of how, if you were doing something similar in Bath, how it would work. And I don't know how university things work in Japan. I've done some teaching at Nagoya, and I get a sense that it's different. So we just have to work and see how that goes. In terms of ideas, I think what we will try and do, but if we don't manage, in other words, if we don't finish, I'm not bothered. It's not too much of a problem. I think the idea is we just start thinking. But substantially, I think there's two things I would like us to do this afternoon. One is to think about what is it that we mean by international development and poverty, and we will all have different views. And second, to take how we think about international development, and this is what I will try and do with you today, and to show that behind that, there's a set of thoughts, there's a set of ideologies, there's a set of thinking which influences that. Okay? So if you take someone who is, I don't know, if you take the government, for example, right now in Denmark, the government of Denmark is quite conservative, perhaps even right-wing, and 10 years ago it was quite left-wing. They have very different views on what international development is all about, and they have very different actions around it. Partly because the actions reflect the way we think. And what we tend to think about development is poor people, and helping poor people. But we never think why. Now for some of us, helping poor people is a good thing to do because it's good. And for others, it's a good thing to do because it's morally correct. And for others, it's a good thing to do because we technically can do so. And for others, it might be that's what politics is all about. We help each other because in return we want something else. I might help you through aid in order to get more trade. It's just a political bargain to it. And again, we might all have very different views on what that's about. Okay? So that's what we're going to try and do. I've got these, so obviously you don't have to keep writing down things, and at some point I'll collect emails and send everything, so don't even worry about that. That's not important. Okay. I don't know why it does that, but I suspect my daughter. I remember once at the university having to do a public lecture in front of other staff, and if you teach first years and you teach staff, it's different. I prepared it very well, and my daughter went on and did all of these flashing things, and I didn't know how to undo it. So, this is what we want to try and do today. Understand what we mean by international development, and I hope that you don't have the same view as me, and I assume you don't have the same view as the person sitting next to you. And that's fine. That's what happens in social science. Be aware of different ways of thinking about poverty and its measurement. And secondly, start to think about areas in development which might interest us. So some people are here because they're interested in children, education, planning. I started off with an interest in community and NGOs. Somebody might have an interest in child soldiers. Someone might be interested in ethnicity. And then within that, someone might be interested in that because they're an economist, a political scientist, a sociologist, or an anthropologist. So we all got different interests in development, okay? And why we want to do it. I've always said to students, the reason why I'm interested in international development is because I hate poverty. And they say, that's not fair. Because it means that when you do your research, you've got bias. And I say, exactly, I do have bias. Loads and loads of bias. Because I dislike poverty. And therefore I wanted to study it, I wanted to work with it, I wanted to try and do something about it. And even as an academic at the university, I want to change conditions so that poor people are not poor anymore. And I've never had any problem with that. Okay? So international development is one of those areas where we can be academic researchers who want to use the research to change things. It's not like biology, it's not like chemistry, where we go in and we do experiments and whatever the result happens, we report. No. In development, I want particular results to happen. And I use my research to try and make those results come about. Yeah? Yeah? So, what is all the fuss about? Why is international development on... I was saying to some people yesterday, when I studied international development masters, I think in Britain there were 4, maybe 5 universities who offered international development. Now, I think there must be 30, maybe even more, in Britain. And all of them are doing quite well. So they have numbers of students. And that means the students are finding jobs, which means the international development is going this way. Yeah? Why? Because at one level, it captures quite a lot of interest, topics. So if you look at these pictures, you can see some of them. On the top you've got McDonald's with a cow in the middle of some city. Yeah? Very, very common in many poorer countries. I suppose you wouldn't see cows floating around Tokyo, but you would see them in, for example, Bangladesh. And at the back of that, McDonald's, this huge, global, very successful company. So you've got something quite traditional with something very modern stuck together. And how these things come together, quite interesting. If you go to places like India, certainly Bangladesh again, you find that people have got very modern things, mobiles, Wi-Fi, technology, connections, and yet quite a lot of traditional things. And some people are interested in this global, traditional relationships. You come down to the second one, flooding, climate change. Big issue. Because it just so happens, although we are all affected by climate change, some people in some countries are more affected by climate change than others. And most of those countries are poorer countries. Okay? So climate change is another big reason why people might be interested in international development. And then you're going to be talking to geologists, geomorphologists, economic people who do climate change and modelling, etc. Another potential area. The third area is the UN. And the UN represents a whole series of international and national agencies who have got an interest in international development. So the Millennium Development Goals came from the UN. The Japanese government has a particular view on development and takes it forward. Either it wants to impose or push the human security agenda, or it wants particular emphasis, for example, in East Asia, because it's got political interests in Australia, Philippines, China, Korea, Japan. And therefore it's much more interested in development here than it would be in, for example, Bangladesh. An example. So, governments talking to each other is another reason. International agencies being formed is another reason. So much so that development has become like an international public good. We're all interested in development. For some people, of course, development just means extreme poverty. Whether it be for famine, whether it be through illness, whether it be through homelessness, whether it be for other reasons, people who range from dying to surviving. And that's the main interest in development. This was my beginning in interest. I was interested in this. Other people might be interested in other things, perfectly legitimate. More modern. Some people are interested in development because it's one of the ways that we deal with and engage with the modern world of terrorism, conflict, security, and so forth. Okay? So, when I started development, we never had courses in conflict. And now conflict and security, again, huge on the agenda. And the final picture I put there, of course, is this rural, pastoral land. People who are working mostly in agriculture, rural communities, who are trying somehow to forge a living, and people, again, their interest in development is about their interest in rural areas in particular, agricultural production, etc. So in other words, we can all have different ways of thinking about development, or different interests. And as you can see, whether you talk about McDonald's, terrorism, the UN, we're all involved anyway. Your tax money is partly wrapped up in international development. And why? Well, because the government of Japan is interested in making inversions or commitments in development, because it needs to hold its own in the international community. So Japan is particularly keen in having roles within the UN. Yeah? And partly that's about its relationship with China. Because it's either going to be China or Japan in East Asia. So Japan wants bigger roles within the UN system, and one way of getting those roles is by playing a bigger role in the international arena. And one way of playing a bigger role in the international arena is by being very active in development. So, you've just had your Great East earthquake, loads of money going now internally from Japan to the earthquake area, quite rightly, and yet you still spend quite a lot of money in development. Why? Doesn't make sense. Only makes sense because there are interests that you need to keep internationally. And you can have other photographs, of course. We talk about international development. So what's international about it? Okay, so this is the stress on the word international about development. First of all, international tells us that it's fundamentally about, this is changing, and I'll explain later, relationships between nations, relationships between states, usually in the form of transfers, but also in the form, for example, of conditions. Okay? So you can give money, but you can also exact something. What often gets forgotten in development, and again we won't go into it, is that part of that relationship between states is based on colonial structures, powers, and relationships. And many people will see international development as a continuation of colonial relationships, especially now since our focus is on Africa and South Asia. So, many of Japan's aid relationships will reflect elements of colonial struggles, traditional colonial struggles. But the international development is also about organizing our world. And this changes, and we all have different preferences on it. So, for example, we talk about the North and the South. And we don't know where Japan is, if it's North or South, if it's somewhere in the middle. Some people want to talk about the West and the East, but then you've got the North. Yeah? Some people divide the world into first worlds, second world, third world. Yeah? Another way of classifying the world around us. Some people will talk about the West and the non-West. But the non-West then would mean something like Japan and Philippines and Indonesia together. If we talk about the North and the South, Japan is with the United Kingdom. Okay? So you're shifting things all the time. Some people just talk about developed and developing. Developed countries, developing countries. Some people just talk about rich countries and poor countries. In all of them, we're trying to organize the world. And each of these have different connotations. And all of them have faults. So even if I take developed and developing countries, we will do this later. What do you think is the poorest country in the world? Let's go around quickly. Everyone think for 1 minute. What's the poorest country in the world, do you think? 1 minute. Doesn't matter. No one's going to get it right. Okay, 1 minute's up. Let me hear it. Poorest country in the world. Oh, Hyundai. You don't know? Say it in Japanese. Sounds good to me. Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone, in Africa. West Africa. Good.
I don't think the poorest country exists because the criteria always change.
The criteria might change. Good.
I think one is West African country.
West Africa.
Niger. Niger in Africa.
Niger.
Bangladesh.
Where? Bangladesh. Uh-huh. Sierra Leone.
Niger or North Korea.
Uh-huh. North Korea is interesting here.
Maybe Somalia in terms of
Somalia.
somewhere in Africa.
Somewhere in Africa. That small country called Africa. Yeah, somewhere in Africa.
I think also Somalia.
Somalia. Sierra Leone. Cambodia. Sierra Leone. Sudan. Uh-huh.
I have just like what it is like
Some
some countries.
countries in Africa.
North Korea or Sudan.
North Korea or Sudan. Sierra Leone.
Country in South Africa.
In Africa. Okay. It's interesting. I think if I'd asked the question in Bath, no one would have said North Korea. So it's quite a Japanese thing to be thinking East Asia. But I think many people would have said Africa, as many people here have said Africa. And there are reasons behind that. Okay, let me tell you now, everyone failed. Disaster, 0%. But we'll come to that later. Just hold your country in your brain. We'll come to it later. But it's a way then of developing categories. Yeah? And as you see, we tried to correlate, I think somewhere, it must be in Africa, or it must be North Korea. And no doubt the Africa thing, I know the Africa thing comes from Millennium Development Goals. Yeah? Because that's been such an important push in the last 10 years. So we always tend to think about Africa as being the poorest. If we'd asked the same question in 1985, maybe Ethiopia, 86, 87, I don't think people would say that. Some people might, but not everyone. So that's a kind of Millennium Development Goal reflection. East Korea, of course, is your own political reflection. It's partly because you're aware of it, it's partly because you know the geopolitics of it from here. If you'd asked that to students from Latin America, they might have said Nicaragua, they might have said Cuba. But you mostly said, well, North Korea, otherwise one Cambodia, but the rest of it mostly Africa. We'll come to the answer maybe later. I don't know the answer, by the way, so it doesn't matter. The International also talks about other types of classifications. We'll come to this again: high, middle, low income. And this becomes important when we talk about the poorest countries, because I think we're going to get time to talk about it. But what it doesn't tell us about, of course, is internal distributions. So all of these classifications are false, but all of them have weaknesses. Yeah? So if you go back up to this, International relations between states, we forget to talk about colonialism. Ways of organising, some countries don't fit into anything. Some countries, Japan, might be north at the one point, and then east. Developed on the one hand, and maybe on another hand it's got the first world, etc. So not perfect. High, middle, low income, again, not perfect. Why? Because it doesn't tell me about inside a country. So if you take some, anyway, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Sierra Leone, there'll be very strong pockets of very strong poverty. There will also be areas in Sierra Leone where people are excessively affluent, very rich. Right? And so it doesn't really tell me enough about Sierra Leone unless I start to understand the very rich people in Sierra Leone as well as the very poor. The same in Bangladesh, Cambodia, the same in Japan, the same in Scotland, the same in every country. So the problem with these classifications, it doesn't talk to me about something internal. In the international of international development, the thing that drives, the thing that really pushes these classifications is something about economic consideration. Whether it be growth, whether it be measurement because of income, these are then used to classify different countries. But we never stop to think, why is it income? Why don't we think of countries in other ways in their development? And I put up some example. Race, culture, religion. That's difficult. Well, it is difficult, yes. In Japan, like the UK and like most other countries in the world, we rank countries mostly by GDP. Yeah? In other words, of growth and its ability to produce. There are some countries which have decided not to do GDP. Bhutan. Do you know Bhutan? Bhutan has its measurement is not about gross domestic product, it's about happiness. So they've thrown away economics and said what's important is that people are happy. And so there's a whole index out there about happiness and whether or not societies are happy. And if you're happy, then that's a different form of consideration. Why not? Why are we so obsessed with economics, with income as a way of distinguishing each other? And of course, spatial organisation. If we had to take a photograph of the world in 1950, we would see poor countries here, rich countries there, middle countries here. If we take it in 2012, things will have changed. This is why the question about what is the poorest country is interesting, because it changed from many years ago. Many years ago, well, we'll come to later what are the poorest countries in the world, and then we'll tell you which ones would have been. So that changes, that's the point. It's never the same. It's always changing, and the context around it changes. Now we move from the international of international development to the development. And what does the development word tell us? What does it mean? Well, today at least, the problem is poverty. So international development sees itself primarily as trying to address, change, improve poor people's lives. Okay? Some people are not happy with that because it's negative. It's like if I look at you as a poor person, I only see you as a poor person. I don't see other things that might be happening in your life or are important in your life. So look at the language that we use with poverty. We use language like poor, oppressed, exploited, deficit, lacking. Yeah, all negative things. None of it's positive. Why is it not positive? People in Bangladesh, people in Sierra Leone, also have positive things about them. But that's what we have. So poverty is seen as the problem, and poor countries are seen as trying to catch up with us, but not quite managing. And of course, we always think that we are the best. We're just trying to catch up. and we hope that with our help, we can push them further. We will come to that because that's a particular way of thinking about the world. And some people like it, some people don't like it. Okay? So one way of looking at poverty is people are trying to catch up. Another way of looking at poverty is if this is poor, it's only poor because this is rich. And if this is rich, it's only rich because there are people who are poor. In other words, it's not catching up. The fact is that some of us are poor, and some of us are rich, and the reason the rich are rich is because they exploit and use the poor. So almost, you've heard Marxism. It's like a Marxist theory, but thinking it more forward. Okay? We will come again to talk about this later. Some people see poverty just as a technical problem. I can fix it. Poor people are poor, what do we need to do? We give them some credit, we give them some infrastructure, we give them some education, and if we give them those things, they will manage to then develop themselves. It's a technical problem, and we just need to fix it somehow. And some people, me, don't see poverty as the problem. Poverty is not the problem. Poverty is the effect. Yeah? It's like an illness. Poverty isn't the issue that we're dealing with. Poverty is the effect of something else happening. Yeah? And what international development should be doing is trying to work out what is that something else that happens which makes some people poor, some people not poor, and some people rich. So we don't focus on poverty, we don't see it as a technical problem, but we see poverty as indicating that something else is wrong, and that we need to find out what that something else is. Again, we could all fit into each of these, and of course we move between them. Because there are some things which are technical problems. If you have to build a bridge, it's a technical problem. If you have to build a road, it's a technical problem. If you have to balance out relationships between men and women, that's not a technical problem. That's a social problem. And we need to work out why there are big differences between men and women to then try and change it. It's not the same as building a bridge. And if you look at these things, this is where we're starting. We'll do this a bit later, a bit more, but each of those ideas about lagging behind, chasing the rich people, poverty seen as either rich and poor together, the technical solution to poverty, or poverty as a symptom of something else, they all come back to bigger ideas. So why do they want development? Because it's a way of keeping social order. If poor people become completely poor and we don't help them, then society will fragment. If it fragments, we'll have chaos, and if we have chaos, we don't have order. This is part of the reason why development and international relations are coming together, because of the security agenda. For some, it's about social conflict. This is Marxism. So the reason that you're rich and I'm poor is because you're exploiting me. And the only way for me to improve myself is to either break the relationship or to fight back, revolution. So it's about dependency and breaking dependencies. The technical people, they see development effectively as a management, a science of management. And it's about managing different projects in order to have those technical improvements made real. And again, you've got people who do masters in the management of development. That's what they think. They want to manage projects, they want to be involved in the management of projects. The relational one is quite slightly more difficult. Effectively, if I say that poverty is the symptom of something else happening, what I'm trying to get at is that poverty is the effect of our interactions, whether that be individuals, or whether it be nations, or whether it be communities, or whether it be the north and south of Japan. And therefore the way to solve these issues is to change those relationships. Not easy to do. But international development, so we've talked about international, we've talked about what development is at the moment, and now we need to understand that it's always contested. International development sounds like a good thing, but for many people it's a very bad thing. Very bad. Because it hurts people and it keeps them down, keeps them oppressed. So, not everyone, but some people do. So we're just going to read this. This is one example from a man called Escobar. Okay, and people coming from Latin America in particular have a very strong view of trying to create alternatives to development because they think that development is not good. It's not all right. So making the third world, development as a post-colonial project, centered with aid as the instrument of the geopolitics of knowledge. So aid being used to create a world. Dominating the way people think about themselves and their lives. I'm poor, you're rich. Emphasizing the negative aspects of people. They are poor, they are deprived, they are primitive, they are traditional, etc. Alienating them from their ideas and aspirations about their lives. So one of the strange things you find in going around developing countries is how many people have basically the same thing. If you go to Sierra Leone, you go to Bangladesh, you see the poor people are all doing microcredit. So the same model for everyone, and you ask, why? Why did they come from Bangladesh to Sierra Leone? Bangladesh to India, maybe. Bangladesh to Sierra Leone, why? Because we're all following a single model. And what he's saying is that by imposing this model, we're actually doing damage. Yeah? We're not helping people. Let me give you an example. Who thinks that microcredit, you know what microcredit is? Giving credit to poor people? Is it a good idea or a bad idea? Who thinks it's good? Who thinks it's bad? Who doesn't know? Me too. Here's cases in Bangladesh. There are many cases where people get microcredit and they have some money. And with the money in their hand, then they can start to do small business. And by doing small business, they slowly improve their lives. But who gets microcredit in Bangladesh? Mostly women, not usually men. Why? You see, in my household, women spend more than the men. So I wouldn't give my wife microcredit. I take her credit away quickly before she gets to shops. So why in Bangladesh do we give microcredit to women?
They have to emphasize the women's rights or human rights.
Okay, so it's a way of trying to equalize men and women. That's quite good, yeah. That's one reason. What's the other reason? Or what other reasons might there be?
Because women raise children, so they have no time to work.
Women have children, and therefore they don't have time to work. You might be right, I think. You might be right, I don't know. But that could be a reason. So they can't work and therefore they get credit. Yeah, possible.
Maybe we can see if that's easier because women have always been oppressed, so their status is more than men. So if we give them money and try to put them in couple state,
So we try and bring them together. Possible?
and see the result.
Yep.
Women can utilize money in a better way.
Women manage money better than men. Possible. It could be that women manage money better than men. My grandmother, who never worked, whenever she did get some money, she used to spend it on food, but she always put some hidden. And why did she do that? Because she knew tomorrow there would be an emergency. So this money was for that. My grandfather never knew. No one knew. She just kept the money in a jar. So maybe women are better. Maybe they are. My wife isn't, but maybe they are. Yeah? Shall I give you another reason? It's much more difficult to discipline men. If we're married in Bangladesh, she's at home all day, looking after children, doing some work in the farm, but she's always at home. She's not allowed to go out anyway because of culture. Yeah? So she has to stay at home anyway. Men, we go out. We do our work, and then in the afternoon we go and have our tea, have our cigarette, we go and talk, we gather, we have discussions. We could be out for 1 or 2 days, and no one knows where he is. But no problem, no one says anything. If she went out for 10 minutes, aha, problem. Where is she? What's she doing? She'll be punished. So women are always around the house. So first of all, it's easier to bring them together. Very easy. And if someone then gets into a problem he can't repay, I can ask the other women to put pressure on her. Pay back. I can't. No, you have to pay back, otherwise we won't get our money. So it's easier to put pressure on them. So what did they find in Bangladesh? The women were collecting this microcredit, and many of them do well. So it's not always negative. Many of them do very well. But the husbands were coming home and seeing that the women have money. What did they say? Give me the money. I don't want to give, you have to give me the money. And if you don't give me the money, beating. So the women then give the money over to the men. The men then go with the money and waste it. Bad investment. Spend it wrongly. Spend it unwisely. So we've taken the money, I've spent it. Who has the debt? Who has the fund? So I've spent the money, she still has to pay. And so you're finding that people are giving this microcredit because it's a way of, because they've got an easier group to work with. Now some people say, well, this is a way of equalizing men and women. It might be. Other people are saying, but not always. Because sometimes what happens is the fights and the tension get stronger. I can't pay. Give me back the money. I've spent the money. I need to pay back the money to the bank. And then the fight, and then the quarrels, and then the arguments, and then physical fights. So we take models into some areas and we haven't really thought them through. We can also be hurting people, damaging people. One view, it's contested. Another view, this is my teacher many years ago, who's Lord Beside. We give $50 billion of overseas aid. This is British money. Okay? There are 1 billion poor people in the world. So $50 billion, 1 billion poor people. Why don't we just find the poor and give them $1 a week and do nothing else? Just give it to them, $1 every week. No questions asked. no conditions, no problems. What they do with the money is up to them. We don't need NGOs, the government of Japan, the UN and everyone else to be telling us what to do with the money. Just give it to them and they'll do it. That would probably do much more to relieve poverty than anything else. So he's not like the first person saying get rid of aid, he's just saying do it differently. Get rid of all of these people in between, give money directly to the poor and they'll deal with it. Oxfam, different view. Two big issues in development. One is about the amount of aid we get. The other is about the amount of debt they repay. Poverty will not be eradicated without an increase in aid, so they want more, not less, and not different. But aid also needs to focus better on people's needs. So we want more money and we want it better focused. This means more aid spent on areas such as healthcare and education. So three very different views about development. One said, forget it, it's useless. The other saying, we just need to give poor people the money and don't worry about the rest. No NGOs, none of that. And the third is, actually we need more money and better focus. And that will improve poverty. And again, you're going to find both in policymakers and academics, people who hold each of these views in development. Okay? So development isn't always good for everyone. Some people think it's not a very good idea at all. Okay, there are three words here, and it's for you to think about, then we're going to do a small discussion. Mercenary. Does everyone understand mercenary? What's a mercenary? Neither do I, so this is a problem. Mercenaries are usually people who, in war, if I'm having a war in Japan, yeah, I buy in professional fighters. So I'm a professional fighter with guns, and I sell my services to the best person. That's a mercenary. Someone who's free to do war for the highest price. Yeah, so you've got people who will go to, where will they go now? They might go to Sierra Leone and fight for one group because they're getting paid very well. Then the next year they might go to Sudan and fight for another group because they're getting paid. Mercenaries are people who sell services to the highest bidder. Let's come back. Okay. Missionary. Everyone understand missionary? What's a missionary? Missionary, mission? NGO, yes. What's the other missions? You have them in Japan. St. Francis Xavier. What's his name? Japanese system. Mission is when, for example, to Japan, the Catholic missionaries, they came and tried to convert from Buddhism to Catholic religion. So missionaries are people who go to other countries in religion and try to get you to change religion. Yeah? Misfit. Misfit is someone who doesn't fit. It's not quite there. I can't remember. What's the name? I'm getting very old. My daughter and I went to something in Nagoya last weekend. You go to a park and there's music and people come together who are wearing the same kind of clothes. In Japan. What do you call it? So it's quite big. There's one in Tokyo, very famous, where on a Sunday morning, I think, in a park, mostly girls, but it's not true, boys and girls. So do you understand Gothic? Gothic dress? So all the Gothic dress people come together, all the other people come together, Is there something in Japan called that? What's it called? Yeah. People who dress in a particular way and have styles, and they meet in the park on Sunday. Never heard of it? I will by the end of 5 o'clock find what this word does. Anyway, on last Sunday before that, we went to the park, and there was quite a lot of, yeah, I'm not very good at this, I don't understand fashion. People dressed same kind of clothes and style.
Like cartoon or
Yes. I'll get the word. Anyway, everyone in the park were basically dressed quite similar. And that's what made them friends. So you're either all dressed as Gothics, or you're all dressed like dolls, of whatever fashion you do. Anyway, the point is that whenever we went to a group and they were slightly Gothic, yeah, and then there was me. I was a misfit. I didn't fit inside the group. Huh? I didn't fit inside because I dressed differently and because I couldn't speak Japanese and because my daughter was looking at the makeup and the colours and things. Misfits, you don't fit in quite well. Okay? So, there's a very famous article written about development. And it says in development you're either a mercenary, or a missionary, or a misfit. Okay? And what do they mean? The mercenary are basically those people in development who often work for big agencies. This isn't a bad thing. It's just the way that it's a description. So they might work for big agencies, consultancies, academics, yeah? And our job is that we are working in aid because, not only because, but we want a material return. So I like working in development, but I need to get paid. Yeah? And if some other university offers me a better job, I might go. Okay? So we work in that kind of area where we can realise our professional aspirations, we can get pay for it, and we're interested in development. Mercenaries in the sense that if a better job comes up, well, I might go there. So I'm working for Oxfam now, but JICA's offered me a job. I'll go to JICA. Why? Better pay, better pension, and loads of sushi. I don't know. But then you're in JICA and the UN asks you for a job. What's the option? I'm off to the UN. Why do I go to the UN? Better opportunities, better job, better career option. And then the World Bank was there. I want to go to the World Bank. Then go to the World Bank. So perfectly normal career. Still always in development, and for some people very well paid. For other people maybe not, but for some people very well paid. So it's about the material benefits that we can get from working in development. Okay? And if we go and do a master's in development, we do it partly because we're interested, but partly because we want a job. At some point, I wanted a job. Some accusation that they're not always very good. Okay, some accusation are not always very good, and sometimes they're not well informed. So if you take the British government, so our JICA, the British government is a thing called DFID, and they work in Bangladesh, and they are useless. They don't understand Bangladesh. They're not allowed to travel without permission. They never go outside of the capital city, and yet they're making big decisions about billions of pounds. And I look at them and think, you're not very good. I wonder why you got this job. And most of them are in Bangladesh because they want to get to the next job, which is back in London with more pay. So mercenary, I want to work, I want to be paid in the job, but my main job is about professional career, and it's about getting a wage for that. The missionaries. Missionaries were people who came and tried, so priests and sisters, fathers, nuns, yeah? And they didn't get paid. So, who are the missionaries? Often people who are working with NGOs, community-based organisations, grassroots organisations, volunteers, interims. And why are they doing that? Because they're passionate. They want to change the world. They really want to help people. And so the best way to do it is internship. It's volunteering. It's going to help poor people. So it's about our motivation. And it's about helping people. That's what really drives us. Some accusation that they say they're very close to people, but they're not really. They're not that good either. Some accusation. Some people get to misfits. They're misfits in their own country. I was. I'm a misfit. I finished my undergraduate study and said I will never touch another book again, and left for India. And I forgot to tell my mother that I was leaving for India. So I phoned her and said, oh, I'm in India. And I never returned for 4 years, 3 years, 4 years, 3 or 4 years. So she came to Bangladesh to get me to go home because she had lost me. So I left for India and didn't tell her. I was a misfit. I didn't feel comfortable studying. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I thought, I'll go to India. So maybe I was looking for a different kind of world. Not quite a career. I didn't want a career. And I didn't want to work in NGOs and missions. So I just wait and see what happens. Now, the thing about misfits, missionaries, and mercenaries is that often we might go through them ourselves. Good example here, isn't it? You worked in Japan,
Yes.
then you went to Sri Lanka
From 3 years ago.
for 2 years as an intern. Internship.
Yes.
Volunteer.
No, volunteer.
And in Japan you had a job
Yes.
and a career. Why did you give it up? You fool.
I wanted to go and stay in another country, and I want to get a chance to work in European country and international development.
So someone gives up a good job and becomes a volunteer in Sri Lanka. Fine, so he's went from mercenary to missionary. A bit. Now listen, what do you want to do next year?
Next year I want to study abroad.
So he wants to go abroad again, bit of a misfit. Why do you want to study?
International development for city planning and planning.
And why?
Why? Because I hope to get the kind of job.
Come back to the mercenary. He's a mercenary, became a missionary, bit of a misfit. Now, and his parents are saying, will he ever decide what he wants to do? And the answer is no. So we go through different things. I started off a bit of a misfit. I started then working in a village, kind of NGO, so I suppose a kind of missionary. And then I came back, started my master. I did go back to reading books, and I wanted a job. But I wanted a job where I could also do development. So a missionary, in a way. So they're not separate. We move between these things. Okay. We're going to have a bit of a break and a bit of a discussion in groups. I don't know how you do groups, but this is the reason why thinking about development is important. Development isn't about doing things. It's also about doing things. People do development. We work in NGOs. I don't do development. Okay? But I'm interested in development. Because development isn't only about doing things. Development is about ideology. Development is about normative. And that's the most important thing about development, because primary purpose of development, primary, is to convince, to persuade that this and not that is the way the world is and should be. Development is about setting up a pathway for the way the world should be, ought to be. The question is, we're never quite sure who is it that's driving this car. Because you might think it ought to be in one way, and I might think it ought to be in a very different way. So development isn't only, it's not even, in my view anyway, it's not mostly about doing things, it's mostly about trying to convince other people about the way the world should be. Right? And that's why we need to think about development, because that's important. The way the world should be. Of course, no one owns the world. And so we're always competing, negotiations, trade-offs about the way the world should be. Okay. I don't know how to do this best, but I don't want to either keep everyone always sitting, so we should have a break. What I'm going to try and do next is to think a bit more about the idea of poverty. And specifically, how do we think about measuring poverty? And again, there's a good reason for this, in that how we measure things counts. In 2008, the World Bank readjusted its measurement, its criteria, its methodology. And as a result, it discovered 1 billion new poor people. Now, discovered them means it's not as if they were in a cave to be found. The number made it. How do we, does anyone know how we normally measure poverty in the world? How do we normally do it? How do we know that Japan's richer than Bangladesh? Income's one way. We'll look at the detail in a minute, but usually, I asked them for something, they wouldn't get it quite right because I'll break it. Usually what we do which pen is nicer? Quick. None of them. This one was cheaper. So we're going to use this. Usually we have lines. Anyone below the line is poor, anyone above the line is rich or not poor. And then we have percentages here, percentages there. We'll look to see how we do it in a minute. But effectively then, if Japan has got 10% here, and 90% up here, and Sierra Leone has got 90% here, and only 10% here, then this is going to be poor. Okay? So we use this stick to measure poor, and we can move it up and down. So one way that we do it is $2 per day. So that's the standard international way of calculating who is poor. Those who have less than $2 a day, average, are poor. and those who have more are not poor. And then we can compare all different countries. Remember what I said the first time though, we don't understand what happens within countries. That's important. So $2 a day. There's another measurement, which is $1.25. Okay? $1.25 is extreme poor. So you've got extreme poor, $1.25, poor, $2, then non-poor. We spend quite a lot of time and energy trying to change the line, get more people over. Yeah? That's what development tries to do. And if we get more people over, we become less poor. What's the easiest way to reduce the number of poor people in the world? Drop the line. Change the line. You need to make the line up here. Why don't you make it down there? Yes. So if we said no dollar a day, if you're below no dollar a day, you're poor. If you've even got $0.1 above, you're not poor. Then there's no poor people in the world. Maybe one or two. So the line becomes very important because where it goes fundamentally changes these calculations. And this line then becomes a big source of argument. One, where should it be? And two, is it useful? Because if you can just shift it using a computer, an Excel sheet can shift this quite easily. Why $2 a day? Why not 1.7? Why not 1.6? Why not 1.8? Why not 10? Yeah? And where you move this, changes right. But it's not just about the line. Let's see this. Oh, you can hear it. Can you hear? Hang on. Stop.
We have to sleep without food. Due to extreme poverty, we can't take care of our children and they become weak. The chief district medical officer says almost.
Okay, let's start again. Okay.
Was the first child due to malnutrition. Now she's trying to save a second child in what has become a common situation in one of India's poorest states. We are poor and don't know what is happening to our children. It is difficult to ensure 2 meals a day. Oftentimes we have to sleep without food. Due to extreme poverty, we can't take care of our children and they become weak. The chief district medical officer says over 7,000 babies aged 1 to 5 have died from malnutrition in the last 5 years. It is also reported that over half of all children aged 1 to 3 born in Orissa suffer from malnutrition. But one UNICEF state representative says poverty shouldn't stop kids from getting proper nutrition.
And your experience has shown that even poverty, including poverty, livelihood, issue, constraint, is not a barrier to improving the condition of children. We can develop the appropriate strategies. We can involve the community so that they can develop appropriate strategies. We have got a lot of resources in our state. So the challenge that we have, and it's a challenge that I'm confident the government is taking quite strongly, is to how we involve the community and develop appropriate strategies.
But poverty is an obstacle for many in Orissa. The average age of girls getting married in Kionja district is 18. And the rising cost of food is making it even harder for new mothers to feed themselves and their families.
Yeah? Got the idea? More or less? What did you understand? What was the word that you picked up?
Increasing cost of food.
Increasing cost of food. Yeah. What was the word with malnutrition? What does malnutrition mean?
Is the lack of nutrition?
Lack of nutrition, either because you're not eating enough or not eating the right quality. So malnutrition going up, that's one thing that happens. 2 meals per day. Cost of food going up. What other things did we say? Children. What happens through malnutrition? Children die. 1 in 6 children dying because of hunger. What else did they say about young girls? Marriage. Young girls married off very early, young. So the story basically is in Orissa, an increase in malnutrition, not because of that, as a consequence of that, children dying quicker, and those who survive, at least the girls, are being married off earlier. And the reason you marry them off earlier is because it's cheaper. So if I have 3 daughters, 16, 14 and 2, 16 is too old, 14, 10 and 2, the 14-year-old, I want to get rid of her. Marry her in another house, and that house looks after her. Okay? If I'm very poor, who do I marry her to?
A richer
Hmm?
guy. A richer guy.
Richer guy if I'm lucky, yes. But I'm not usually lucky. Poor people are not lucky. So what would happen? What might happen? Because I'm very poor, everyone knows that I need to marry my daughter away. Where am I going to marry her? Who's going to come looking? It could be human trafficking. Quite often what happens is, if you're very poor, the daughter gets married to someone who's much older, often sick, perhaps even not able to work, because she's been married off to look after this person. That's cases where, do you understand dowry? Dowry? What's dowry?
Money to her husband. Money and gold.
So if I want to marry off my daughter, I have to pay a dowry. I have to pay the groom's family some money. And this is in South Asia, it's increasing. More demand. Buy me a motorbike, buy me some gold, buy me a roof for my house, etc. If you're very poor, you don't have much dowry to pay. You have 2 meals a day, you don't have money. So instead of paying money, I pay by giving away my daughter to someone who's much older, who needs a nurse. Right? Who needs someone to look after him. Doesn't need a wife, he needs someone to look after him. So my daughter then becomes married to someone who might be 40, 50, and who's not going to work anymore. What happens to my daughter at 14, who's married to someone who's 40 or 50? She might get pregnant, she'll have a child, and then the husband some point, dies. So by the time I'm 18, I've got a child, my husband is dead, and no one wants me. And who wants an 18-year-old with a child? No one. So I have to find another marriage. I can't go back to my father's house because I don't want to, I'm too poor. So I marry again. And again I'm married to someone who's old, weak, and who needs looking after. Again, I get pregnant. And again the cycle goes. So a sign when young girls are getting married too early, it's a sign of poverty. Okay? Good. Now you'll see this one. I think this is interesting.
This was home for Dave DeVito. The size of a closet had what he needed most: internet hookup and computer job search. Eno worked was tested for around $20 a day after one family on the job. That's home and went to big ones. His wife and three children left him. Eno has a tiny apartment with his own kitchen and bath. But more importantly, a job. It's not glamorous, but it's saving him from a life on the street. Ironically, the same economic downturn that caused Eno his upper-class lifestyle landed him this job. Sukasa, a company that created the bedrooms, is seeing a booming demand for its cheap daily rooms. Occupancy is always 100%, says Sukasa's general manager. The company is constructing more buildings but can't keep up with the demand. Sukasa, going beyond expectations, hired Eno 2 months ago. This is today's Japan, says Eno. It's the reality of the country. There's no safety net. We don't know our lives tomorrow. You can hear that same warning again and again in Tokyo's 10 cities. This is a once unthinkable scene in a country where lifetime employment was a rule just a decade ago. After the change in labor laws, temporary workers now make up a third of Japan's workforce. They make less, have few employment rights compared to full-time workers, and are being fired en masse in Japan's recession. They're the working poor, they're the ones losing their jobs, says the Young Workers Union of Kuzo Kawazoe. It's not true anymore that Japan is a stable, rich country. Kawazoe says there's not enough unemployment insurance for these workers and not enough jobs. Fired have no way out. Compounding the problem, Tokyo is one of the world's most expensive cities. So the line between comfortably middle class to suddenly homeless is in some cases very thin. It was for Ito, so grieved for what he once had. But he's trying to focus on rebuilding life. Step by step, he says. The process is moving pretty slow. Like how quickly he moves it all in his time. CNN.
What did you understand?
There's no safety net in Japan anymore.
No safety net in Japan. So once you fall, nothing to stop you falling. Unemployment, no labour rights, no long-term security, therefore no pension. And one company doing very well, Sakasa. Have you heard of Sakasa? So this is Sakasa here. This is what you get.
This was home for Hideo
Home.
Ito. The size of a closet, it had what he needed most: an internet hookup and computer to job search. Ito rented this net room for around $20 a day after he lost his art gallery director job, his expensive home, and went bankrupt. His wife and 3 children left him to cool.
So art gallery director, lost his job, wife leaves him, 3 children leave him. He ends up in this small Sakasa place, $20 US a day, and the company is doing very well, very happy, because there's loads of people who are coming because of a similar situation. No job security, so he moved from art director to cleaning. Yeah? And what else did they say? Something very important sentence. Tokyo is one of the most expensive cities in the world. Yeah? Okay. Now we do a little discussion. Find groups of 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever you want to do. Okay. The question is this. Who is poorest? Ito or Our Lady in Orissa? And why? Yeah? Who is poorest? Ito? In Japan, in Tokyo, the most expensive city of the world, no job, etc. Or Orissa, the women, eating twice a day, malnutrition, daughter getting married. So who is poorest? And the second part of it is why. So go in groups of 3 or 4, let's do 5 minutes and discuss that. Who do you think is poorest? And more importantly, why do you think they're poorest? Yeah? You do one group. You do one group. Fine. Join them.
The question is, who is more? Ito So why don't we just say our own opinion? I think it's Orissa. Okay, now you have to say But actually, I think both. It's difficult to say. To me, it will look healthy enough, but it seems like some children not healthy. So maybe
Orissa is in the more difficult situation with to life. And also maybe Ito will recover his situation maybe 2 or few months later. He may be able to get the job.
so there's more options for it. Doors helped by company how they yes,
What kind of
there's another view that, for example, for Orisa, maybe all people in her village is in this similar situation, so maybe it's easier for her to deal with. But for Ito, it's very different. Everybody seems different to you, and maybe it's difficult psychologically to deal with the situation. When you talk about relatively poor, Ito is relatively poor. Orisa is maybe she's not relatively poor. So when you think of poor poverty, yeah, if that's the criteria, then it's Ito that's more poor.
Done? Yeah? Let's hear it. Okay. What do you think?
I would think Lisa is poor because
Which one?
Lisa.
Orisa.
Because she is more likely to die easily than Mr. Ito. Even if Mr. Ito lost their job, he can still use the livelihood welfare, 生活保護.
Ah,
So
okay.
he is less likely to die. And so this is
Okay. Back?
Well, we had mixed opinions. Some people thought Orisa was poor, others thought Ito was poor. For Orisa, it's basically the same as the bird before us. For example, it's her health or the likeliness to die or the vicious cycle of. As for Ito, it's easier for him to recover. There's more options for him. Maybe he will get back on track easier than Orisa. But when we think about relative poverty, maybe in Orisa's village, everybody is poor. So when we think about what is poverty, maybe she's not considered poor in her village, but for Ito, in Japan, there's tons of people who earn a lot of money. So relatively, maybe he's poor. So that's what we were discussing about.
No opinion. Orisa is poorer than Misa Ito, because she has children and she can treat safety more than Japanese man. In Japan is more safety opportunity more than India. I think Orisa is hard to read their art or life.
we discussed, Elisa is the forest in the world because Mr. Ito said he is sad and miserable, but he could spend his life even in a small house, and but he could live in a safe life. But on the other hand, Lisa is suffering, and Lisa, she might not live her whole of her life.